Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, Super Bowl edition. And at last check, about 760 of these provided by Bet the Board over the years, going back to inception. I am your host, Todd Furman, joined, as always, when it comes to the National Football League, my esteemed colleague and co-host on this fine program, Payne Insider. And Payne, the marathon that we call the NFL that starts in the spring is about to come to an end with the Chiefs and Eagles doing battle for the second time in 3 years in lovely New Orleans.
Yeah, lovely New Orleans. That is correct.
Where neither of us will be.
Surprised you're not
for this game.
No one went this year. I was quite happy. We didn't miss out on anything.
Nah, look, at this point, I mean, maybe it's because we're old. Maybe it's because we can't stay out till 3 or 4 in the morning on Bourbon Street or want to eat beignets and need that mid-afternoon nap. I'm perfectly fine covering the game remotely, being able to bebop as needed around the casinos out here on the Strip. And after being in Phoenix 2 years ago and being in Vegas last year for the game, getting a nice respite doing it from the home office is a welcome reprieve.
Yeah. I don't think I'm going to many more unless they're in specific cities. I mean, there needs to be a place with 5+ steakhouses that are actually good. I think that's
the next 2 years you're not
barometer.
going. The next 2 years you're not going. You'll wait till it gets back
Where's
to Indy.
next year?
I'm sure. Next year's in Santa Clara, where I don't think anybody is interested in going, given the proximity to hotels and events. And then I think L.A. is the year after as well. So, again, nothing close by, nothing centrally located, nothing but complications. So I imagine your Super Bowls will be limited over the next couple of years. We'll get you out to Vegas, though, for the College Football National Championship when your Seminoles are back in the mix in 2027.
2027. Interesting. Who's the head coach?
It's a good question. Is there another Bowden in waiting that they can bring in?
That was not meant to scare people on Norvell. That is not what that was about.
Hopefully Jameis Winston want to get into coaching to eat dubs on the sidelines?
Did I see he was at press row asking questions?
Yeah, he was there. He was actually handing out dubs from what I was told. I didn't see if any video footage circulated, but Jameis is a character. And look, when Jameis's playing career ends, probably sooner rather than later, he will make an excellent addition to the booth for purely stand-up comedy as much as anything else.
National treasure. And if Tom Brady's worth $375, Jameis would be worth $500.
Jameis might actually be required to attend the pre-production meetings, though, for big-time games. I'm not sure he'd have the same conflict of interest, although you never know. Maybe he'll be part owner of an organization as well, like Tom Brady was able to do, bringing Pete Carroll to the desert and changing the dynamic, hopefully, for the better for the silver and black as the Raiders try and get things sorted out, watching one of their division mates vie for their third straight Super Bowl crown in as many years. And Payne, before we get into some of the X's and O's on the game, may as well start with the top-line market, and I don't think it requires an in-depth discussion or dialogue by any stretch of the imagination, but Kansas City opens as a 1.5-point favorite, as high as 2, and some prominent national locations. We're now calling the number a 1-point consensus. Total down a touch as well. Look-ahead numbers at some books had this hypothetical at 46.5 when this was the projected matchup. Both games go flying over the total on Championship Sunday. Opens 49.5, upwards of 50.5, and we're now looking at 48.5. So just your initial thoughts on side total and the way the market has kind of responded after being on the board for 10-plus days now.
Interesting question. I kind of in my head when I saw this line, I was like, man, there's not much to attack here, but I have a feeling where they're going to go. And so Philadelphia's starting to take some money. I think they're going to continue to take some money, and it just becomes a question of where the books want to place this, because I would anticipate some Chiefs money from the public closer to game day, but certainly there have been some buys from professionals on Philadelphia, and I think if you just look at the matchups, it's difficult not to find multiple areas where the Eagles would have an edge. I think in my mind, though, and it's not just the simplicity of reading Mahomes in a virtual pick'em, although it could be that simple.
It will be for a large faction of bettors.
But and those bettors have not been wrong.
No, they haven't. So I mean, we can say it jokingly and mockingly, but those bettors have been rewarded for their faith in an elite head coach with an elite quarterback. That when he has the ball in his hands in a one-score game late, there's nobody that you feel more confident being able to get you across the finish line and cash that ticket.
And it's not just that either, right? I mean, you have a kicker who, when's the last time he's missed in the playoffs? You have a defense with Spags. I mean, Josh Allen had an opportunity to win that game. Why didn't he? Right? So it's not just the Reed and Mahomes. It's very clear, and we'll talk about it a little bit, but like, look at the Chiefs' defense. They played their best against the 6 best passing offenses they faced this season. Right? They just find that gear, and that's why they keep winning. It's a collective effort. It's not just Mahomes and Reed. It's the rest of the team, too. There's something within that organization right now that tends to have them win games like this. But, you know, if I just looked at my power number and said, hey, what is this line in a neutral? It's Eagles minus basically 0.75 for us. So it doesn't shock me. Now, the move through the zero is not going to be overly consequential.
Teaser leg, baby. Think. Teaser legs.
Yeah. The total, and I'm just going to be, I have not bet it yet. However, the model spit out a number that would agree with folks going under 49.5. There's certainly a game state where both of these quarterbacks, they don't really throw the ball deep down the field. Their air yards per attempt are extremely low. Philadelphia is going to take a run-first approach. Kansas City, even when they throw, are methodical in that approach. A lot of short stuff. So, you know, how do you get to that number if there is an explosiveness? But in terms of, like, the game, you just think about it in the simplest context. I mean, Buffalo closed Pick'em last week in Arrowhead. So it's not all shocking to see Philadelphia start to take some money from some respected guys here. And that's kind of my thought on side and total. Now, there also is a different faction, Todd, that likes Philadelphia, but is also fearful of Kansas City just finding a way to win these games. And, you know, I sent you that note last night. They attacked the first half, more of a get-in, get-out approach there. So that's kind of what I'm seeing from side total perspective. Don't have a penny on either personally.
And I think it's also important to contextualize this, as I know a lot of our listeners that have been with us since show one know we approach things a little bit differently than the casual fan or some of the other content that's out there. It's just one game. So professional bettors have no problems if they feel there's opportunity and upside. Betting Philadelphia, losing one game, it's not like it's going to sit with them for the next 6 months, whereas there is another component of bettor that goes, look, I can't handle or stomach losing betting against Patrick Mahomes. And we got that, quite frankly, when we bet the 49ers against the Chiefs earlier this season, that people just didn't want to try and fade that juggernaut. So I can understand both sides, and it's how people look to approach a game like this, knowing there won't be any meaningful football for 7+ months. But
the also is the portfolio, too. It's like, sure, if you're a professional bettor backing Philadelphia here, it's like, okay, if they lose, there's still an opportunity to have a profitable Super Bowl because the portfolio of props in totality is going to outweigh the money you have on the side, right? So, I mean, the other reason here, and this is just my perspective, I would look at this a little bit differently than a regular game, right? Let's say I made Philadelphia a small favorite here. I'm not betting it, but typically that edge would yield a bet in a regular week. Okay, so let's say you have a 1.5% edge or something. I would be less likely to bet that in the Super Bowl because, one, the prop market is far more liquid than a regular week, and the offerings are far more robust. So I can stack multiple larger edges that way than I can in a regular season week. So if this game were played in the regular season where I don't have the market liquidity in the prop market or the robust offerings, I would probably bet this game in the regular season as opposed to this week, even if everything was the same.
No, it is a great point. And I think as we assess the prop market and its evolution over the years, significantly different the way it looks now in 2025 than it would have 10, 12 years ago, where you're seeing a lot of these player props hung on a week in, week out basis. It's not just the marquee players. So professional bettors getting smarter, more strategic, all about figuring out when to time entry into the market, and for some of the bet types that they're looking to try and isolate and be able to identify, other than the rogue number here or there. One thing that the casual fan has been able to reap the benefits of, though, the past 3 Super Bowls have all been decided by exactly 3 points. First time ever that 3 straight Super Bowls have been decided by 5 or fewer points. It appears gone are the days of those gaudy numbers that you and I grew up on in the 90s, where you saw a 2 touchdown plus favorite and you were just hoping that the game was played within a single digit window throughout the mid 90s when it was AFC, NFC dominated in that capacity. But to your point, Kansas City, they have made a habit, a trend. It is consistent. 17 straight wins in games decided by 1 score. It's the longest streak by any team all time, including the playoffs. And Patrick Mahomes can become the 4th starting quarterback to win 4 Super Bowl titles, joining Tom Brady, Terry Bradshaw, and Joe Montana. Andy Reid looking to become the 3rd head coach to win 4 Super Bowls himself, joining Bill Belichick and Chuck Noll. Meanwhile, on the other side, paying the Eagles, first team in the Super Bowl era to add 2 non-special team starters in free agency and have them earn first team All-Pro honors. Zach Bond and Saquon Barkley have gone extremely well and been both productive on the offensive and defensive side. Philadelphia trying to become the last team to win the Super Bowl with a top 2 rushing offense and top 2 total defense, joining the Chicago Bears way back in 1985. Shout out to you Bears fans who say we never say anything nice about your organization on this program. As we assess these teams and how they look on both the offensive and defensive side, I'll kind of open it up to you in terms of figuring out if we want to dissect Philadelphia's offensive path to success against Steve Spagnuolo's defense that's taken on water stopping the run, but has been able to come up with those timely stops when needed, especially on short yardage, or the Eagles' path offensively, led by Saquon Barkley, who has now moved to the MVP frontrunner wearing an Eagles jersey. And then Kansas City offensively clearly has been their strength in the past, but we've seen them kind of take on a different approach the way they've gone about moving the football this year against a Vic Fangio defense that has clearly paid off in spades the way they've remade a secondary that was in shambles coming into the offseason.
Yeah, it's amazing, that upgrade, right? I mean,
Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper, baby.
That, but it's also Fangio.
Oh, there's no doubt. He had the pieces in place.
Those players are young. They improved that secondary, but Fangio's just an absolute monster, has been for ages. It might as well just start there then, right? With Fangio versus Reid and the Chiefs offense. You know, when you're kind of mapping this game out, and maybe I overshot the props portfolio this year because it is a little bit tougher when you have a game priced closer to a pick'em, right? You know, the game state props are tough to find because you're not quite sure of the game state, as opposed to a game where maybe there's a 7-point favorite. It's easier to kind of find some of those game state props. But I think, the Chiefs leaned into their run game early last week against Buffalo. Buffalo shows those looks. Andy Reid found a run type where he was able to, at least very early on in the game, take advantage of some of the counter runs the Bills had struggled to defend throughout the course of the season. But past that, there wasn't really much efficiency there. So I think that maybe dictates how the Chiefs are going to operate, because I don't think they're going to find a ton of success on the ground. And what we saw in Super Bowl 57 with these two teams was Andy Reid using gobs of motion to kind of get the Eagles front out of position because they're so aggressive, and it led to a much more efficient rushing attack. 57% rushing success rate the first 3 quarters, plus 0.26 EPA per rush.
By the way, you mentioned Super Bowl 57. How much of that do you apply to what we're going to see this Sunday?
It's crazy because I came into this game like, this isn't really all that interesting. And even though we're doing this and we're going to these games, each and every single week, it's like when you have 2 weeks to break down two teams, you're like, these teams are polar opposites from what they were just 2 years ago. I mean, the Chiefs' run offense in their current form is just wildly different than it's been the last 2 seasons. that Super Bowl 57 run, Pacheco was ignited. It was a part of the offense that I don't think they even expected to have. But boy, it paid dividends in the Super Bowl and late in that run. But you just look now, it's like Pacheco hasn't been great since returning from that leg injury. We all know it was like a 6 to 8 week injury from a time frame perspective, but any of these injury docs were like, yeah, even though he returns, he's probably not going to be himself till next year. Kareem Hunt, I think he's been efficient in certain instances, right? If you're going to ask him to go get short yardage, that's more of his bag at this point. He's kind of plotting. And then something we talked about the last handful of weeks is the Chiefs kind of shuffling the deck chairs up front and negating, their own interior strength by kicking Tooney outside. Kelly Endo just can't play at this level, was exposed again last week. And so a lot of the inside power and the inside zone concepts that the Chiefs were running with that trio of, Tooney, Creed, and Smith has kind of been negated a little bit. And you have Pacheco again at less than 100%. That speed to the outside hasn't been there. So a lot of the zone runs haven't quite been there this season for the Chiefs. Maybe 2 weeks off changes that. Hunt can't really get outside anymore. So right now you're looking at a Chiefs offense that's averaging negative .32 EPA per rush using power, just a 33% success rate using outside zone. Last week, again, Reed identified one specific run type that gave the Bills trouble, and they were vulnerable defending the counter runs early, and it created just enough efficiency to have balance. But, Pacheco and Hunt, you have two backs that are well below league average in explosive run rate, despite facing the easiest schedule of explosive run defenses since week 11. So I just, I don't see a ton coming from the Chiefs' run game here. On the season, it's been the least explosive ground game in the NFL. There's been rarely an ability to break tackles or be elusive, and the Eagles have been top 5 defending, that run type of counter that they used last week. They've been top 5 defending power runs. So you almost want to kind of throw the Chiefs' traditional run game out the window here. Even with some of that early success in the game, Todd, the Chiefs dropped back to throw against Buffalo 10% over expectation. Early downs, the Chiefs have the second highest pass rate. So this is going to be a game where very much reliant on Patrick Mahomes, as it should be. I think maybe...
Let your alpha keep the ball in his hands more often than not.
Where the variance lies and the potential dilemma that Andy Reid might have is that you're looking how their offense is currently constructed, right? Xavier Worthy has clearly grown up a bunch. Hollywood Brown is back and healthy. Veach goes out and trades for Hopkins. Juju isn't completely cooked yet. And last week, I think, in my mind, the best way to attack the Bills was using 3 wide receivers. And I know regardless of the one-game sample against an elite-heavy offense in Baltimore, it felt different, but the Bills' defense was top 5 defending passes from 12 on the season and bottom 5 defending them from 11 prior to that Ravens game. There really was no other way for the Ravens to attack. They are a heavy offense. There was no Zay Flowers. So I wasn't quite sure that was going to be the game plan with Kelsey and Gray. It was more of my mind saying, hey, 3 wides. But the best way to attack the Eagles is with 2 tight ends. So will Andy go with the more talented guys that they've spent significant capital on and spread things out, or is he going to attack more with 12 and you're going back to Kelsey and Noah Gray's going to be more than a blocker this week? And that's just where the Eagles have been vulnerable. So I'm kind of in the dark there as to what Reed's going to do. It's been pretty split in the playoffs, but the sample size is just 2 games. The regular season rates I'd throw out the window since Rashee Rice went down early and Hollywood Brown's season was derailed from the onset, and Hopkins, was added late in the season. So I think some of the 11-12 splits full season are a little wonky. We know Fangio wants to keep Cooper DeJean on the field as much as possible. I think even if the Chiefs show heavy looks, you keep DeJean on the field and see if the Chiefs can run well enough before you take him off and put a bigger body out there. That would be the path at least I would go. But again, just a stark difference in the Eagles' ability to stop the pass. 17th in EPA per pass allowed versus 2 tight end sets. Number 2 when facing 3 wide looks. The delta has actually gotten much larger down the stretch as well. Eagles 21st in EPA per dropback against 2 tight ends since week 11. The game within the game, I think we mentioned at the top, is Vic Fangio, one of our favorite defensive minds, versus Andy Reid and Mahomes. The NFL is not a large sample size sport. And in general, 8 games is not large. But I think when you're putting it in the context of Super Bowl matchup, I probably should have looked this up, but it's rare you're going to have 8 games of sample. And the one thing that's been pretty clear is like Fangio's made Reid and Mahomes work for every yard, every blade of grass. And the Eagles' primary coverage is zone. It's approaching a 75% clip against dropbacks, highest rate of cover 6 employed in the league. Use a lot of cover 4 as well. Because of that, Philly's been great defending explosive plays. They just don't give up the deep shot. They don't give you that look. But the Chiefs really have been an offense that's willing to move it methodically since all the teams changed the way they've been playing the Chiefs, and obviously Tyreek Hill leaving was part of that. But I mean, you look at Mahomes, right? Lowest air yards per attempt of any qualifying QB this season. The highest rate of passes thrown behind the line of scrimmage. The lowest rate of throws 15-plus yards. So theoretically, the Chiefs would be built to face that style of defense, right? It's not going to be like, oh my God, it's an offense built on explosives. How are we going to survive here?
Yep.
This is kind of what they've grown accustomed to. And even with the Eagles defense built to stop explosives, they've been great defending short throws as well.
Yeah, been one of the best in the leagues in that department.
Yep, they've been excellent defending the quick pass in under 2.5 seconds or less. I will say, schedule of offenses haven't been great.
How dare you talk poorly about the Cowboys and Giants?
So, I think, that's what Reid and Mahomes have been doing to kind of combat all of the shell coverages the last few years. But again, quick throws, short throws from 2 tight end sets. Those 2 tight end sets, it's a little surprising the Eagles have been porous defending those, but we know it's an organization that hasn't been willing to spend a ton of finances on the linebacker position. Early last week, we saw the Chiefs really use the RPO game a bunch, specifically with Hollywood Brown. Eagles are only slightly above average defending those throws when looking at success rates. So there are some paths here for the Chiefs offense, and make no mistake about it, I don't think the Chiefs are good enough in protection up front to go away from the quick pass game, right? I mean, Jalen Carter and Milton Williams probably are going to do quite well against Mike Caliendo and Trey Smith. Smith is going to have a massive contract this offseason, but he's better as a run blocker than pass protector. You do have Nolan Smith, who, speed rusher, and kind of when I think about Tooney as a left tackle, what immediately comes to mind is he's like a roadblock that's like 8 feet wide, but the road's 12 feet. And so you can, if he gets his hands on you, right, you're not going anywhere. And he's big enough, but if you can get around him. So I think that's probably where Nolan Smith maybe has a shot or two at getting to Mahomes. I think the other key factor within the Fangio-Reid-Mahomes battle here, and it's been known for a long time with Fangio's defense, and I remembered us talking about this because we discussed it in 2020. The Bills traveled to Denver late in that season for a Saturday game, so it made our big game preview. And leading into that week, there was a real emphasis for Brian Daboll to focus on the Bills' offense scoring before it reached the red zone, because once you got into the red zone against Fangio, it's very difficult to score. Right, we know the space is condensed, but when you can stop the run with your front 4 or front 5 and you're playing zone coverage behind it, the space just completely shrinks. And so rewind to last week, we talked about the Chiefs' offense being wildly underrated this season because of their season-long struggles in the red zone on offense. Now, they went out and I believe scored touchdowns on the first 4 red zone trips. I believe ended 4 for 6. on touchdowns last week against Buffalo, but this is certainly a different animal defensively in Philadelphia. The Chiefs' offense has the highest rate of trips into the red zone since 2018. A lot of people won't think that, but because of some of their yards per play numbers. But they've also had the worst touchdown rate of the Reid era in Kansas City. And again, this postseason, you're looking at the Chiefs. They've hit their opponent's red zone on 58% of drives. So I think they're going to get there. It's just a matter of converting in the red zone. And in those 8 games where Fangio faced Reid and Mahomes, he's held those two gentlemen to a touchdown rate 25% below their rate versus all other defenses. Specific to goal-to-goal situations, Fangio's held the Chiefs to a touchdown rate 42% lower than the rest of their opponents. So on paper, Philly is the toughest defense Reid and Mahomes have ever faced in the Super Bowl, but I just think maybe overarching here, Andy Reid and Mahomes have to attack the middle of the field. That's something the Chiefs do extremely well as an offense. That's the area they want to hit. I know Zach Bond has had a career year as a full-time starter for the first time in his career.
Poor Devin White.
Yeah. Oren Burks, this is interesting. He played in the Super Bowl last season, and he actually got on the field, and he was picked on because he was filling in for Drake Greenlaw, who got injured, tore his Achilles in that game. He is filling in for Nakobe Dean on Sunday, obviously. He's made a couple splash plays the last few games, but he's never been a full-time starter in this league. And part of that was his ability in coverage was horrific the first 3 seasons. The Eagles have covered it well, but they have been, metrically, if you look at yards per target allowed to tight ends, they've been decent, but there's a lot of volume to that area because Cooper DeJean has been awesome. Quinyon Mitchell, the dude's an eraser. He has been all season. We knew what he did to Terry McLaurin a couple times, but in the playoffs alone, targeted 15 times. He's given up 5 catches for 24 yards, has 2 picks, and a passer rating allowed of 2.8. So the key is to attack the middle of the field, and we've seen teams smart enough to do that. The last 2 weeks, Rams and Commanders, 23 catches for their tight ends on 31 targets for 201 yards and 2 touchdowns. So that's going to be the area that the Chiefs look to attack.
It makes things interesting because we know Travis Kelce can be one of those polarizing figures. We saw him completely bottled up last week by the Buffalo Bills, largely by design, and it had no negative impact on what KC was able to do. We'll see if Kelce can get himself back in the mix. When you look at his over-under for receiving yards, priced anywhere from a low of 61.5 to some rogue 65.5s that are out there. You mentioned this being the toughest defense that the Chiefs have had to face in their Super Bowl run. You like this group a lot better the way it's constructed than what they had to contend with during the COVID year against Tampa Bay Bucks?
I think I know what you were asking. I not that I zoned out. I was
no. You're completely
looking at a text that come in. You're saying the
Bucks defense that was able to slow down Kansas City.
Yeah, if you remember, I believe there were first of all, that is one of the matchups within this game, and I do think Milton Williams and Jalen will have they should have a massive edge going up against Caliendo and Trey Smith as a pass protector. It'll be interesting to see who Creed Humphreys has to help every single time. And, you had Jordan Davis, who has not been great this season, but coming off his best game. So inside is certainly concerning. And I don't know if I want to completely say it's to that level of Bucks versus Chiefs, because the Chiefs, if you remember, came into that game, I think they had 4 guys basically either
they were banged up. Mahomes was banged up, so they weren't working with a full deck.
I will say this, if you remember in Super Bowl 57, one of the massive talking points in that game and why there was some over money despite one, the Eagles defense hadn't played a soul, so we thought their rating was a little phony. But if you remember the grass that they flew into Arizona, all the defensive line we're talking about, they're playing on an ice skating rink. They couldn't get up the field. Now you're not on a slick track. You're in a dome on turf, fast, right? That's what's Nolan Smith's speed. That's why even though the Eagles have been good defending the short, quick throws, you still have to do it because there's probably not a chance in hell that you're going to be able to pass protect long enough against that that Philly defensive line.
Yep. No, it makes a world of sense. And like you mentioned, that game within the game to try and figure out how an elite offensive mind schemes against an elite defensive mind and who can throw a couple of curveballs that the other doesn't anticipate to create either the explosive in the case of Kansas City or Philadelphia looking to try and hold back some of their stuff when they need those high leverage downs to work in their favor. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there for all things Bet the Board podcast related. Again, be sure to follow Bet the Board at Bet the Board Pod. And I'm guessing you already have and continue to do so as we wrap up yet another NFL season around these parts. On the other side of the ball, Payne, Philadelphia offensively, first in the league in rushing attempts, 32nd in pass attempts. As an offense, they faced the second highest rate of single high looks at a shade north of 59%, with defenses often opting to keep as many guys in the box to take away Saquon Barkley, who's poised to have one of the best seasons as a running back to put on the books, rivaling that of what we saw from Terrell Davis way back in the 90s. Kansas City's run defense hasn't exactly been a brick wall. It started the year as a strength of this defense, raised some eyebrows. I know we were able to profit quite handsomely from it in the prop market, betting against opposing running backs on a variety of fronts. But over the second half of the season, the group has kind of descended into being average, and in the playoffs, albeit just a 2-game sample size, if you extrapolate out for a full season body of work, their run defense would be ranked 30th from an EPA perspective. What changes for Steve Spagnuolo in this particular spot, and how does Philadelphia go about trying to do what they do best, trying to break tendency, or creating some of that balance that we've seen from Philadelphia from time to time?
You mentioned some of the run rate numbers there at the top, and I think it's pretty straightforward attack plan for the Eagles in my mind, and we can get into the nuts and bolts. Philly is a far different offense than the one Casey played in Super Bowl 57. And you just look, the Eagles right now, the only offense this season to run more than they passed. And it wasn't because of game state. The Eagles had the lowest pass rate over expectation as well. And Kellen Moore has really leaned into an offensive line that's top 10 in run block win rate. He's fed the most dynamic playmaker on the Eagles offense in Saquon Barkley, who has the most yards over expectation than any other running back in the NFL. And he gets better as the game goes on. If you look at rush yards versus expectation in the second half versus what he does in the first half. So it's a guy that continues to get better as the game goes along. So, it just makes sense to feed Saquon, and now you have a defense that's good enough to where you don't necessarily need to put the game in Jalen Hurts' hands, right? And so there's been some chatter, whether radio guys, I kind of go into my cocoon here, and we do our work as a team, and we come out the other side and we form our opinions, and then maybe towards Tuesday, Wednesday of the week leading to the Super Bowl, you start to kind of, we'll call it turn on the radio and listen to what others have been talking about. And there's been this conversation of like the Eagles breaking tendency and coming out pass first. I just don't see that happening. It's a far different team than the one in 2022, right? There was this emphasis on getting Jalen Hurts to throw when he'd be most comfortable, when defenses had to think run or pass. Now it's just like, we got to get Saquon the ball. We got to rely on our offensive line. If we punt it, it's okay because our defense is actually good this year. And it's not just a byproduct of a shitty schedule like it was in 2022. So
it was an easy first half.
And we saw them anytime they played. I think that in that 2022 season, that was our whole talking point in that Super Bowl 57 was they played like 3 top 10 offenses, been shredded again, by every single one. They just played a bunch of dregs. So this is actually a good defense. And so I think that you're not going to go away from it in the biggest game in my mind. But, I think it's also an understatement here saying the Chiefs' run defense has struggled the back half of the year. If you look the first 7 weeks with great to above average run offenses in this sample, like the Ravens and the Falcons and the 49ers, Spags' run defense was 6th in EPA per rush. Since week 8, it's 18th. And the schedule has been much easier, especially down the stretch. All below average rush offenses from weeks 13 to 17. So, then the deeper you dive within the run matchup, how Philly chooses to run the ball and the dilemma that could put the Chiefs in, when A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are both healthy, Philly is very much a 3 wide receiver set offense. That number has increased in the 3 playoff games to 81% the first 3 quarters. If you look at the Chiefs' defense, 24th in yards per carry allowed to runs from 11 personnel this season, 3rd against 2 tight end sets. Leo Chenal, right? A lot of times we talk about metrics, but when you're able to match the film, when you're able to match the tendencies to the data, it's because Leo Chenal is the Chiefs' best run defender. He lives on the field when teams use heavy formations. They play a lot of 3 linebacker sets. He's a thumper. But he's not on the field nearly as much against 3 wides, and it's Chamari Connor that's on the field, the big nickel. He has more than a 17% missed tackle rate. And so that's partly why you're seeing them much better against heavy formation runs than you are 3 wides. Philly runs from 3 wides. So on paper, this is a little bit of a change-up for the Chiefs' defense. They have not faced a lot of offenses that are predominantly 3 wide. I think maybe where the variance lies here is, again, I mentioned at the top, everyone's thinking Reed and Mahomes, and certainly that's the architect, but Spags is just an absolute animal, right? I mean, he's just shown an ability to limit running backs in this game, and I don't think that's necessarily the case here, but the Eagles backs in Super Bowl 57, right? And I know they weren't as good. CMC last year in this game, the 49ers came into the Super Bowl. It was the most efficient rushing attack. We all outlined like, hey, we think maybe they get this going. Spags limited San Fran to a 33% rushing success rate and minus 0.37 EPA per rush last year. I mean, CMC was an accumulator. And, the other outlier here, or the other area of variance, the Eagles have faced the very easiest schedule of run defenses this season. And, they haven't been as efficient with their early down runs as you would expect, right? It's been a lot of the Saquon's natural ability to bust explosives. But this is certainly, a far more diverse rush attack with Hurts' ability. Barkley is far better than anything Philly had in Super Bowl 57, and Kellen Moore's doing a really great job using more motion to minimize a lot of the run support. And, again, the Chiefs have really struggled stopping the run down the stretch despite a really poor schedule of run offenses faced. I think through the air, this probably won't come as a surprise because we've talked about it for multiple seasons with Jalen Hurts now. Far better against man coverage than zone. Being able to read man pre-snap and throw one-on-one to the outside away from conflict where it's just read and go. That's when Hurts is at his best. And, that's led, if you just look at the Eagles, they're number 2 in passing offense in EPA versus man coverage. Then you factor in what we expect to be an Eagles offense, again, living in 3 wides. Chiefs 27th in passing success rate allowed against 3 wides. So, it sounds like the Eagles are going to dominate, right, on offense.
History tells us that's not going to be the case regardless of what the Chiefs do during the regular season or the personnel that we try and grade out on an individual grade score.
Yeah, I mean, I fully expect Spags to throw a curveball here with 2 weeks. Like, he's going to look at the film, and even though he is known for his high rate of man coverage, and this is a conversation that we had, last week, coverages for the most part are mixed, right? I mean, top 10 rate in the league this year, Spags has used in terms of man coverage. It's only 30%, right? So the Chiefs' defense still plays zone on nearly 70% of their defensive snaps, despite being a top 10 man coverage team. So it's, we've kind of gotten into this realm on how we talk about games, but my point here is they're going to be in some zone for this game. And Jalen Hurts is much worse against zone. It would be really wise for Spags to come out, play lots of cover 3, something Kansas City's done about 19% of snaps this season. Jalen Hurts has struggled mightily against that look. I think the entire goal of the Chiefs has to be forcing Jalen Hurts to think, right? Make Jalen question what he sees, make Jalen pat the ball. He's been more than willing when that first read isn't there to hold on to the ball. The Eagles have also faced the number 1 easiest schedule of pass defenses this season. So there is some real variance here. But the goal, again, right, you got to make Jalen hold it. His average time to throw this season is 3.2 seconds, second highest in the NFL. He's been horrific when under pressure. 23% of pressures have turned into sacks this season. I know this may get people a little weirded out, but we know Jalen ditched the knee brace ahead of the Commanders game. He's had 2 weeks to further rest the knee. I think Spags has to make Jalen move laterally as much as possible to test that knee early, wear that knee down as the game goes on. Maybe you get him to retweak it. When it comes to the zone read early in the game, I'd be cheating Barkley.
Yep.
Let Jalen try to run early in hopes that you can pop him a few times on that knee. Blitz-wise, Spags has a ton of complex pressures. You go back to Super Bowl 57, he chose to blitz Jalen Hurts on 43% of dropbacks. Jalen was playing much better at that time. He was healthier heading into that game despite not being on the injury report this week. And that was the reason Philly was able to build the lead, because Jalen was fantastic against the blitz. 3 big-time throws, 0 turnover-worthy plays, 83% adjusted accuracy in that Super Bowl. He just hasn't been in that form down the stretch. But Spags has got to find a way to pressure Jalen. Not just to test the knee, right? Not just in hopes that the body blows early lead to issues late, but Hurts 37 out of 37 qualifying quarterbacks in EPA per attempt when pressured. And because he holds on to the ball, he's 33rd in sack rate. So if you can get the Eagles behind the down and distance, it means less Barkley. It's a chance to force Jalen to think, because you can throw complex coverages and known passing situations, dictate that Hurts throws to the middle of the field, an area where he's not overly comfortable throwing. The Chiefs' defense, and I mentioned this at the top, right? Again, not just Reed, not just Mahomes. It's the entire team, their ability to step up in these big moments. They've risen to the occasion this season in the toughest circumstances, right? It's why they win some of these big games. And so far, it hasn't been any different. 6 times, KC has faced a top 10 passing attack this season. It was the Bengals with Joe Burrow, the Ravens, the 49ers, the Buccaneers, and Josh Allen's Bills twice. Kansas City has faced the 4th most snaps against top 10 passing offenses this season. They rank number 1 in EPA per pass attempt in those games. So the matchups are there. It's just what Spags does that you just trust so much that it's not going to be a layup drill as much as some of the matchups and metrics might indicate. But again, cat and mouse of this matchup is simple. Eagles want to be able to dictate by living in standard downs where it can be run or pass, where it can be run with Jalen or Barkley, where you can use zone read and, but it's play action rollout. We know sometimes those Chiefs linebackers get lost. And so we've seen this play recently here where it's zone read with Jalen rolling to the right, and it's a throwback left to Goddard. It's really interesting, some of the things. I also think it would be very wise if the Eagles continue to use no huddle, not just on first down, where that's been their highest rate of no huddle, is when they pick up a first down and then they go again quickly. But make Spags show his hand, right? I would expect Kellen Moore, if he sees Spags playing man coverage, to use, bunch and stack and continue motioning to get his receivers open. I mentioned Goddard. Goddard's been the buzz guy in the prop market early. It makes sense, right? Tied for the team lead in playoff targets so far, leads the team in receptions and yards, and the Chiefs have been extremely vulnerable to the tight end position. They've allowed a league-high 8.7 yards per target to the position. I just get the vibe here, Todd, on game day.
It's not going to just continue heading north.
12 minutes before kick, yeah, there's going to be a buy under there. Could it be wrong still? Could he blow through all of these numbers? Absolutely, the matchup is there, but you're starting to get into a land of pricing that is a touch high.
How concerned, if at all, should we be with the Eagles' injuries along the offensive line, knowing what they dealt with against the Commanders? Cam Jurgens was out there in emergency capacity, but Landon Dickerson gets dinged up early. Everything, if you look at some of the Twitter doctors and you read some of the reports there, Cam Jurgens back, it's going to be touch and go, but you figure he's going to be the healthier of the 2 options. If those 2 guys are at all limited, you give a massive advantage to the Chiefs and what they're able to do generating pressure with Chris Jones, George Karlaftis, and even on the interior with Dana's capabilities and Charles Omenihu.
Hey man, that's Spags has some options there, and I will credit what this Eagles offense did to negate Chris Jones in that Super Bowl 57. It was far and away his worst game of any Super Bowl he's played. Philly had the right attack. They have a good offensive line that they can play him man up. But to your point, Landon Dickerson is, that's a knee injury that's going to require some work in the offseason. Former Florida State guy there. So hate it for him. But then you mentioned Cam Jurgens. It's a back injury. You just never know, right, when that's going to flare up. So you get a situation where, now, the 2 weeks help, right? If this was a situation where we're talking about this last Wednesday heading into last Sunday, it's a different conversation. Like it's really scary. But your hope is that they can get at least one of those gentlemen out there, but that's where you need to find some success. That's a Chiefs defensive line that has to play one of their best games of the season, right? Not just getting pressure on Jalen Hurts, because he's going to get you the opportunities. He's going to pat the ball. You got to get him down. But also in the run game, right? I mean, this is going to have to be a game where Chris Jones is willing and wanting to stop the run as well. So, yeah, certainly some of those injuries inside for Philly is not ideal, but you do get the 2 weeks.
Such an interesting game on both sides of the ball as you try and identify the little edges there that get you to the window with a side, a total, or, of course, in a game of this magnitude with the 1,000-plus prop bets that are out there in a variety of different capacities. You, of course, can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. Follow me there. And, again, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And, Payne, we've covered a ton of ground, and we'll get to the best bet in a moment, but just want to get your overall take on, I know we broke down all of the X's and O's, and the way that you approach the Super Bowl differently, you kind of tipped your hand a little bit in terms of just identifying the props and building out that portfolio off of game script. Or for some of our bettors that may be new to betting the Super Bowl, any advice that you'd offer up to them? They're doing it on a significantly different level in the way we approach it.
Yeah. I think we kind of touched on it at the top, and I understand it's the Super Bowl, and, I'm going to have thousands of bets a year, so this is no different than any other game for me personally. There's either an edge or there isn't, and I know after the game ends, you'll see the scoreboard and be like, oh, there was an edge, but we're talking about this pre-flop. So, again, right, I would say the consensus number on Philly is, +1 right now. My vibe is they may close a small favorite. That's where our power rating had it, but there just wasn't enough edge there when there's a multitude of props. I think that's where you're going to find your largest edge in general in Super Bowls. This one may be a little bit more difficult because of the game pricing. It's a virtual pick'em, and there's a lot of props that have correlation. Noah Gray is an example, right? Last week, there were mixed opinions on him, and it was all based upon the types of formations and the way the Chiefs were going to attack. And I thought it was going to be a 3-wide attack, and that happened to be the case. This week, I've seen some under Noah Gray, and to me, it's like, I'm not saying that's wrong, and I understand that Juju's been playing more in 3-wide receiver sets, but the way you want to attack Philly is with 2 tight ends. So there's some variance within that. You also have a correlation where, Jahan Dotson's fucking terrible, and I'll just be completely blunt there.
Tell us how you really feel, buddy. Tell us how you really feel.
However, he is living on the field, and the Eagles have gone a lot more 3-wide. So you're kind of rolling the dice there that on, one of his 30 freaking snaps on the field, he might be able to catch a ball. So we've seen over half a reception be quite sharp there, but it's correlated. And so, the under half a reception on Calcaterra has been quite sharp as well. But they're so correlated, and you have a chance to lose both. But that's where I think it's a little bit more interesting in this game because, there isn't necessarily a perfect game state that's being dictated by the spread. And it makes even that a little bit more difficult. But ideally, right, you're loading up on more props than you are, and your props portfolio is going to outweigh what you're having on a side or a total here. And it's one of the few instances you have that ability, right? Because in a regular week, for the most part, props are going to be released. They're going to start leaking in on Wednesday, Thursday, and by the time you get to Sunday, a lot has been shaped, but your ability to, as Sunday comes in a regular week, you can get 6 figures down on a side or total quite easy. Can't get that much down on a prop. This is kind of, I wouldn't say the inverse, but you have the ability to stack and accumulate because these props came out priced so early. And I mentioned the market liquidity, and give Jeff Sherman, a guy who's come on our podcast a couple times throughout the years, and the Westgate credit. You experienced this typically. In a regular week, you get $500 on a prop. They're offering 4 times that this week, right? So, and multiply that by how many ever sports books. So if you really, really like the prop, you're thinking over a 2-week span.
Yeah, there's nothing slowing you down.
I mean, there's nothing slowing you down to get 50 to 100 on a prop that you absolutely loved. Now, it takes some fucking work, but...
Yeah, you do need an extensive network across multiple states to be able to do it. But
yeah, you could do it because you have greater liquidity on each bet at each place that's taking these things, and you have 2 weeks to do it. So that's kind of how, even though our portfolio, when I look at in terms of like sheer volume, is not there as it's been in like other years where there's the favorite's a little bit larger. It's still, when you have 0 cents on the side or total, the prop portfolio is going to yield more dollars there, but in general, it's typically larger anyway. So I think what's difficult for me in terms of like thinking about this game at maybe a higher level is like you have Philly power rated, and they've lived in this like top 4 or 5 all season long. And yes, Jalen Hurts has been a little bit dinged up, but it hasn't looked great in the playoffs, right? And I think that's what's made this a little bit more difficult, and maybe why I haven't jumped on Philly despite some of the gentlemen I respect who have. You're an adjusted box score loser against the Packers. You played the Rams in the adjusted box score to a draw. Against the Commanders, it's not even close to a 32-point blowout. It's less than a touchdown. And the inverse was the reality in the AFC Championship game, and this will probably piss some people off, and it's not intended to do that. We just talk about reality.
Billy, cover your ears.
That game's not even close. I mean, the first half, how the Chiefs didn't go into the break up 3 scores is a mystery. I mean, at 7-3, you have an unforced turnover, which the Bills did nothing to cause, on the fumble. That same drive, Josh Allen fumbles, bounces off the deck, and he one-hand scoops it, and you later score a touchdown. So you're up 10-7. Despite having those 2 fumbles on back-to-back series go Buffalo's way, which shifted win probability 28%, you're still down 11 with like 90 seconds to go in the first half. Game's not remotely close. I mean, the Chiefs' passing offense put out a 98th percentile effort. They're averaging over 7 yards per play. And the difference is what those leads would have meant to the game state of Buffalo. They wanted to get their 6th offensive lineman out there, and they wanted to run the ball. Even coming out of the break, forget the fact that, you got the Mac Hollins touchdown to go into half. I mean, the Chiefs come out and get a score. They're back up 2 scores. Like, can you then go on the elongated 8-yard offensive drives? There's not enough possessions left when you're giving up 7 yards per play on the other end. So, I don't want to get into the officials' garbage, but
no, that narrative's been played out.
No, I didn't hear anybody talk about the Hollywood brown face mask out of the half there that would have set up 1st and 10 from the Buffalo 21. Instead, it was 1st and 10 from the 36. You get a run from Andy Reid and incomplete on 2nd down, and a sack on 3rd down that led to no points. They're clearly getting points there if the face mask was called, and that changes the complexity of that game as well. So, again, adjusted box score there, more of like an 8-point winner than a 3-point winner where everyone thought the game was close. So you have like how Phillies played, down to down and not on the scoreboard in the playoffs, been a little bit different than how the Bills-Chiefs game was there in the AFC Championship game. So that's always interesting, but the market has priced the Chiefs as the favorite, even though it's like cognizant of that almost,
It's look, the market and the level of sophistication we see continues to evolve, and it's much different than what we've seen in the past. So it's to your point. It's why when we look at a total that was projected to be 46.5, 47-ish, open 49.5 on the lower end, upwards of 50.5. No shock to anybody that it's taking some under money, but not fait accompli that game ends up coming in with a 24-20 type football game being played on Sunday. Best bet portion of the program, my friend, for the final time this 2024-2025 football season. We mentioned side and total, not a whole lot in the way of investment to be found there. Player prop wise, we've covered every angle and then some through our X's and O's breakdown. Most actionable elements and numbers that are still widely available for our loyal listenership.
Yeah, a lot of this has been beaten up. There are two that, one we still think has value. The second one hasn't really been touched much, but the first one, let's go with Harrison Butker. Over 1.5 field goals made. We're right now at a market consensus of minus $1.60. This is in the portfolio already. We've done some finagling to kind of keep it at this number. Our true number was around the 190 area. So I'm not going to kind of belabor some of these since we've talked about them in passing during the breakdown, but the Chiefs are reaching the red zone at the highest rate since the 2018 Reid Mahomes offense. 58% red zone rate in the playoffs through 2 games. Vic Fangio, we mentioned his elite red zone defense, but the Chiefs don't even have to drive it that far into Eagles territory here, right? Harrison Butker has been kicking a rock outdoors in frigid temps down the stretch this season. He's inside the dome here. And so all of those factors, we like Butker, over the 1.5 field goals here and think there's probably still about 30 cents of value. The other one, again, that we talked about more so towards the top, and these will be time-stamped. I'll make sure that we'll kind of break down each section of our thoughts here, and so you can kind of go back.
We did not have an in-depth kicking breakdown there, so the Harrison Butker explanation. No,
but it was more into the we talked about the red zone stuff, right?
Good point.
So that's a lot of this on the Harrison Butker one. The second one, we're going to go with Kareem Hunt under 45.5 rush yards. I think Pinnacle minus 112, Hard Rock minus 15, MGM minus 110. So the short and skinny here is that the Eagles are third in run stop win rate. They make first contact at the 7th quickest rate. You have that shuffling along the interior of the Chiefs' offensive line that's kind of diluted the strength. And you can see it in the power and inside zone run metrics we discussed earlier in the show. Chiefs have the least explosive run offense in the NFL. Kareem Hunt is 45th out of 53 qualifying backs in elusiveness. I think in the Super Bowl, it's a game where you have to put it in Mahomes' hands. The Chiefs, we know, number 2 in pass rate over expectation. Pass rate last week against Buffalo was 10% higher than expectation. I don't think it would have been a Kareem Hunt game had there not been early success attacking that one run type. And so I believe it was 17 carries last week for Hunt, and so I think that's created some inflation in the market. Now I've kind of mulled the way to attack this. There was a shop early that offered 13.5 rush attempts, which got taken out quickly, but the consensus opener and price, even right now, is 11.5 on the rush attempts. Hunt's longest rush was also lined at 11.5. It's shaded to the under, but I just think under 45.5 rushing yards on Kareem Hunt is the best way to go right now. It kind of negates one run potentially beating you. And then if you look, Hunt's rushing yards relative to the attempts means he'd have to average 4 yards a carry to beat you at the 45.5. Hunt's been well below that despite facing a really easy schedule of run defenses. There's also a non-zero chance with a backfield that doesn't have an elite option. Someone else gets the hot hand, whether it be Pacheco with 2 weeks of added rest for his leg, or Pirine is a factor out of the backfield catching balls, and he's been on the field 23% of the Chiefs' dropbacks in the playoffs.
No Jerick McKinnon sighting this week?
Yeah. The other thing, you just look at how Kareem Hunt's been priced the last 6 weeks. His average closing price is like 30.1 yards. So, I mean, This is what you're looking. Could Kareem Hunt have 46 yards here? Certainly.
Right. Yes, it is a distinct possibility.
These are the kinds of things you're looking for when you're assessing a market, right? That he's being priced, 15 yards higher than his average the last 6 games, and you're thinking the best way to attack the Eagles is very much in the throw game over the middle of the field.
You are selling stock at the proverbial top of the market.
Yes, right. Off a game where he had 17 carries. So that's where we're at. Those are the two that we have that are still widely available at those prices, that we still like at those prices.
Perfect. Anything else you'd like to share before we bid our loyal listeners, whether they're listening for the first time this football season to the Super Bowl extravaganza, or those that have been with us since last May when we gave out the New England Patriots win total under 5.5 before that market got absolutely eviscerated?
Been a tougher season than we had hoped for. Be our first losing season in 11 years. Unfortunate. Hopefully we can end it on a high note with 2 props winners here. And then you just keep grinding. That's it. Other than that, enjoy the game, eat some bad food, have a couple drinks, and I'm sure we will chat at some point here in the future.
Yep. I want to thank all of our listeners, like we said, for tuning in each and every week throughout the NFL season. Those have been with us since the first podcast of the season, previewing some of the off-season moves, a little bit of a recap on the draft, all of the deep dives to get you ready with the preseason props, the win totals, the weekly shows, the Mondays and the Thursdays. Special thanks to all the guests that have appeared on the show, mainly Billy and Brad, the occasional NFL cameo, so to speak, and to our producer behind the scenes who does all the heavy lifting to try and get the podcast out in a timely manner, make sure that everything sounds up to snuff even when we have multiple microphone snafus, because technology is not our foray. So thanks to all of you again, first and foremost to our listeners that have been with us. The feedback, the interaction, the comments, the rating, the reviewing, all of that goes a long way, and it's not lost on us. As Payne said, the results haven't exactly been up to our abnormally high standards, what our expectations are when it comes to getting to the window more often than not, but these seasons happen, and if there's one losing campaign every 11 that we're around, I think we'll be able to handle it, and no one is going to have to go to the breadline with their betting bankroll. So for Payne Insider, I'm Todd.
The under on 11 more of these seasons is...
the under was heavily juiced when this podcast started 759 episodes ago, going under 11 seasons. So yeah, if we were doing a graded market here, yes, the under would be a substantial favorite at 11, and I'm not sure what a fair number would be, but that's a different discussion for a different day. I'm not here to bum out our listeners with the final show of the season. So for Payne Insider, I'm Todd Furman. Best of luck with all of your Super Bowl investments. Most importantly, bet responsibly, and with a Harrison Butker over field goals ticket and a Kareem Hunt under rushing yards ticket in the portfolio come Sunday afternoon. We'll see you at the window.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Furman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.